People have always performed in this room. Not dishonestly, just carefully. The version of themselves they thought the room needed assembled in the doorway before they came through it. I've watched it every day. It isn't new, but there was always a ceiling on it. You were still a body in a room with other bodies. Someone could see your face do something you didn't intend. Someone could arrive at the wrong moment. The conversation could go somewhere you hadn't prepared for. The room pushed back, whether you wanted it to or not. And because it pushed back, the performance had to stay close enough to the real thing that it could survive contact with the room. That ceiling wasn't a flaw. It turns out it was doing something. Nobody noticed because nobody had yet seen a room without it. Social media has no ceiling. I've watched people compose themselves for it, the image taken 40 times and chosen once. Not the one where the light was best necessarily, but the one where the version looking back felt most like the version they wanted seen. The caption written and rewritten. The moment lived once and presented as something slightly different. People have always edited themselves for rooms. What's new is that the editing never has to stop. There's no moment on social media where the prepared version runs out. No conversation that goes somewhere unrehearsed. No face seen at an angle that wasn't chosen. And without those moments, without anything pushing back, the performance and the person can drift apart without either of them noticing the distance growing. Until the edit feels more like them than the original did. Until the original starts to feel approximate. The rough draft of a self that social media has been steadily improving on. The person who arrived at that place didn't choose it. They just kept editing in a room that never pushed back. What makes this different from the editing that's always happened isn't just the absence of a ceiling. It's that the online room teaches. Every time something is shared, something comes back. A number, sometimes a small one, sometimes larger than expected. The face reading it does something. A small recalibration, not always conscious, barely noticeable. And then that room is entered again. A slightly different version of the moment. A slightly different angle on the person. The number comes back again. Nobody set out to learn from this, but the loop runs whether you're paying attention to it or not. Pass by pass, without announcement, the algorithm is answering a question the person didn't know they'd asked. Not who are you, but what travels best? The edit that gets the better number travels. The version of you that gets the better number travels. The online room has no opinion on whether it's accurate. It only knows what it rewards. I've watched someone across a few years. When they first started coming here, the performance would run out. It always does in a room like this. Eventually, something catches you that you weren't ready for. A question that needed the real answer. A moment that arrived before the edited version could. What came through in those gaps was quieter than the presented version, less finished. It didn't have the same surface. Those gaps come less often now. Not because they've stopped, they haven't. But when the gap opens, it closes faster than it used to. The quieter thing surfaces and then the finish comes back quickly, the way a person pulls a coat closed against cold air. The distance back to the unedited version has grown, and I watch them cover it faster each time, as though they've forgotten it used to be shorter. I watch them on their phones sometimes when the room has quieted, scrolling through their own past, images, moments, the account of a life as it was chosen to be seen. They look at it the way someone checks a reflection. Not vanity, reassurance. Confirming that the version is coherent, that it holds together. The gap between what's on the screen and what I've seen come through that door, the two came from the same place once. But the relationship between them has been running in one direction long enough that it's become hard to say which one is the original. This room catches people at angles they didn't select. The expression crossing a face while someone else is talking. The reaction that arrives before the considered one. The answer given in the gap before the edited version was ready. None of that makes it onto the feed. It happens because being in a physical space with other people means being seen in moments you didn't approve. I've watched people find those moments uncomfortable. The face caught doing something unintended. The laugh that came out wrong. The seam showing. And I've watched what comes after the discomfort. Not always, not for everyone, but often enough. Something in the accuracy of it, the performance meeting something real, the gap between the person and the version of them briefly measured as it actually is, lands differently than anything the feed ever delivers. The person who experiences it usually goes quieter for a moment. Sometimes something crosses their face that I recognize as relief, though they wouldn't call it that. That moment isn't available on social media. The feed never catches you. It only ever shows what you gave it. The person who's lost the thread back to the unedited version is harder to reach. Not unfriendly, often very friendly, in the way a carefully built version learns to be. But the thing that used to come through in the gaps arrives less easily. There's more surface and less sense of what's underneath it. And when something difficult happens, the kind that can't be edited before it arrives, the kind this room produces sometimes without warning, they can seem briefly at a loss. Not because they can't cope, because they've lost practice at being seen without the finish on. The room is asking for the unedited version, and the distance back to it has grown longer than they knew. There are people I've watched stop coming. Not all at once. The visits became less frequent first, spaced further apart, shorter when they happened, the coat back on before the room had quite finished with them. And then they stopped. I don't know exactly what happened on the other side of that door. I only know what the trajectory looked like from here. In the time before they stopped, the room had begun to cost them something it hadn't used to cost. The being caught at angles they didn't select. The seam showing. The gap opening before the edited version was ready. In here, those things just happen. The room doesn't ask permission. And for someone who'd spent long enough in a room that never catches you, never shows the seam, never asks for the unedited version, this room started to feel like exposure rather than company. Some of them are still out there, living in the version, tending it, finding rooms that only show what they give them. The coat hook by the door stays empty on the evenings they used to come. The version the room catches when you're not ready, the unguarded one, the one with the seams showing, it's still there, in everyone who still comes through that door. The room keeps finding it, and every time it does, something in the person's face, just for a moment before the finish comes back, looks like someone who's been somewhere familiar they'd forgotten they knew. It waits for the prepared version to run out. In a room like this one, it always does. I'll still be here when you get back.